Afternoon all. Let's continue our coverage of the London Classic, and I'm taking quite a few days over it, but I would like to just look at the key wins. And it was a great point system, 3 points for a win. Now here, Magnus in round 4 was paired against Hikaru Nakamura. So he played c4, and we actually have a Dutch Leningrad from Naka to try and add some complexity and dynamism to the position. But you know, Magnus is going for that iron grip on d5, positional stuff. No gambits or anything, keeping all the pieces in attention, and actually creating a crossfire of his bishops now with b3. So this bishop on this diagonal, he's not too bothered about any sort of b4, b5 here. There's no real targets on the queen side anyway. So the idea here is different. Just simply you know, stick this bishop on the sensitive diagonal as well. So knight bd7, d3. This kind of helps ensure that e4 is not going to be possible. c6. Okay. c6 does kind of weaken black's structure, but it controls that d5 square. Bishop a3, and now we see queen c7. So it seems so far nothing being exchanged at all at move 10. A quiet position. So queen d2, connecting rooks. Comfortably nice for white. I wonder how many of us would play like this as white. Just English, but with b3 and bishop a3, not even with this rook b1 and b4. It seems to me kind of cozy, kind of comfortable. So rook e1, sorry, rook e8, pardon me. Rook a e1. Okay. The rooks, you know, may be helping support e4 later. Knight c5. Again, there's this idea that black's setting up this idea that e4 might happen later. And in fact, this is a chance. If Magnus wants to stop it, it'll be with a big concession though. Imagine he played e4. That'll give black maybe a free hand, you know, say for a knight maneuver, you know, e6 and maybe to d4 later, or even f4 later. So maybe e4 is not attractive to play at the moment. But there's the invitation now with these pieces all geared up for e4 that black is going to play e4. And in fact, after h3, Naka did play e4. Okay, so the position's getting a bit sharper now. Nothing exchanged off at all, or any tension so far up until this point of e4. So Magnus took, then we see knight f takes e4, and now just queen c2, so offering black the opportunity if he wants to exchange knights, which he did, Naka did. And now, okay, what's the outcome of all this? Well, it seems, you know, black's been given semi-open e-file pressure, you know, with a nice potential outpost on the e4, potentially, but at the moment there's a lot of pressure on e4 from these guys. White, by contrast, has a d6 target on that semi-open d-file. Okay. Bishop e6, maybe, you know, the bishop's going to be useful on this diagonal later, sort of trying to discourage maybe b4s from white. This diagonal as well might be useful if it was ever undermined the d5 square. So bishop e6 anyway, it connects to rooks as well. Maybe rook a d8, d5 in the future is also possible. And in fact, after rook d1, rook a d8 is played. So we see again some coordination now of black pieces, as though d5 might be played in the future. Bishop b2, bishop f7. Okay, it looks, I mean, under normal circumstances you think, oh, are they playing for a draw or something? This seems ultra quiet. But white is able to do something very nice now. Just increase the pressure slightly on d6 with rook d2. Just double up rooks. That's very comfortable. And in fact, you know, if you look at white's position, it's solid on the queen side, none of the b4, b5 stuff. It's actually really kind of solid, this structure here. Just a focus on d5, a focus on the bishops across the boards, as we've seen, is a common strategy, positional strategy. So a5 is played, which potentially, you know, has some downsides. Okay, it rules out b4 but b4, you know, maybe it's not that attractive committing these pawns anyway. So I don't know if a5 was totally necessary, but Magnus continues doubling up the rooks. Rook fd1. Okay, rook fd1. How would white build up more pressure on d6? That's the question. Or maybe, you know, he's planning just to play knight e2, rob black of the dark squared bishop, and then torture black maybe with like knight f4 and some other build-up moves later. Naka played bishop e5, so actually he's indicating that maybe, you know, the bishop exchange is going to occur on e5 after knight e2. Okay, and now he makes use of that a5 pawn. It's like he's trying to play energetically all the time, and Magnus is content with a stable position, solid position, just keeping some pressure points on black. But Naka plays a4, so b4, so we see some commitment of this queenside pawn structure. Maybe this bishop's going to have some real targets now. Knight d7, but now bishop d4, okay. And it seems the nature of Magnus's moves, he's always, it seems, letting black do the exchanges if he wants. It will be with a slight concession, you know. Here there will be an improved knight if bishop takes d4, knight d4, or an improved rook, you know, maybe for trebling on the d6 pawn. But actually, you know, c4 has to be wary of c4. Can't use the queen on the d file at the moment. Knight b6 actually targeting that c4. Okay, some action is called for, in fact, because white really doesn't want to play, I think, c5, because then knight d5, nice d5 square, justifying the bishop on f7. So actually he does a kind of positional sacrifice, if you consider that bishops are slightly more weighted than knights as a generalization. So bishop takes b6, queen takes b6, and now protecting the b pawn. Okay, black's got that bishop pair, but is it an effective bishop pair? That's the question. Queen c7. This is kind of echoing a bit now the position in round one that Magnus had, if we think about it, where white, you know, gave black the bishop pair, particularly this dark square bishop. It's not really got any targets. You know, when Luke McShane was playing white, he played in a similar way, in effect. Putting more pressure now on the queen side is something which is being echoed by Magnus. Knight d4, as if, you know, maybe b5 next and c5 is under real fire. So rook c8. So it's a compliment, really, to Luke McShane in this game, in a way, giving black the bishop pair. Is this going to be one of the big questions this year about this bishop pair in this kind of position, this dark square bishop? You know, how effective is it? Rook c1, queen e7. Okay, some quiet manoeuvring now. So rook d3, as though maybe, potentially, maybe rook a3 at some point. Let's also, I wonder about queen takes a4, maybe bishop takes c4, rook c4, b5, ruled that out. But actually, you know, also there's rook a8 to consider. But let's engine check this greedy pawn capture here. Why was this pawn left and pre, actually? And for how many moves, in fact? Well, here it wasn't possible because of bishop takes c4. Okay. But in this position, Magnus had just protected that c4 pawn. So this last move, queen e7, surely that pawn was on pre. So let's just check this question out. This particular question here. Could white have taken on a4 here? It's not really mentioned, so there must be something about it. Wow, wow. There's a nice tactical idea black has at his disposal here to do with queen e7 and this e-file. I wonder if you can spot the idea if I give you like 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, bishop takes g3. This would be slightly better for black. White's best is actually maybe b5 or knight f3, avoiding this. But if he took, this would be terrible. Check, and then just losing the exchange. Losing the rook, and if rook f2, then I think just queen takes d4. Oh, queen takes c1, of course. Forget the d4 knight. So that would be a disaster to be aware of. So this a pawn, yes, it looked for a moment there as if, you know, what's going on here, but actually bishop g3 behind the scenes creeps in to be of major significance. So rook d3. So maybe that's one of the points. It's not just about rook a3, it's safeguarding this e3 point against bishop g3s. Okay, but now Naka plays actively again. He plays c5, changing the nature of the position again. The pawn structure's all been changed again. So B takes c5, rook takes c5, c4 again is being victimized. Queen takes a4 is now finally safe, but the c pawn, rook ec8, ganging up really on that c pawn. Okay, it seems nice coordinated play from black, but okay, what has Magnus got up his sleeve? Rook b1, he's giving up c4 to play this very nice actual queen retreat, which safeguards his first rank on that c1 square, and also adds weight to a pressure point. You know, maybe knight b5 later for d6 to be under fire. And in fact, I think Naka went wrong according to the engines here when I was checking it last time. I think Naka was okay here, but this next move maybe was a bit poxy. Maybe he could have played d5 here. So for example, knight b5, I think we get a situation where rook c2, for example, is okay, or maybe a slight advantage. Fine. Okay, it's a very complicated position. Let's turn off the gewitzers now. Let's just interpret the game intuitively. So b6, d6 is now vulnerable on that d file. But is it technically possible to try and exploit? Well, Magnus thought so. So knight b5, not worried about any potential tactics. With e3 safeguarded at the moment anyway. Bishop g3 doesn't seem to do anything. The rook invasion to c2 looks a bit worrying, rook c2, but that's part of the course here. Rook 4 to c5, in fact, was played, offering d6. So does Magnus have the guts to take it? There's nothing horrible tactically going on, is there? Well, knight takes d6, so he snaps up the pawn, but black does take that a2 pawn. Okay, so we've reached a position here at move 35 where we're actually equal in pawns, but b6 is a bit vulnerable. White's possession of the d file means rook d7 might be a threat. This bishop maybe is slightly superior to this bishop, but does white have a potential winning advantage here? Mysteriously, it seems Magnus is starting to be able to increase his advantages. So how does this happen? Rook a1. Okay, rook a1, and now a nice little tactic, well, if black wants to get the rooks off, is played, which is rook c1, so decoying the queen away from d6, just forcing the rooks off. But is it? Maybe this was a blunder, because actually there's a powerful Zwischenzug to go a pawn up here after rook c1. Was black actually forced to play that? Well, if he moves his bishop actually in this position, actually this bishop just snapped here. If he moves his bishop, imagine if he moves his bishop with the queen on d1. Actually, that was such a fine retreat because it's protecting that c1 square. I think, you know, maybe rook takes b6 is possible, just being a pawn up. And worse than that, there'll be rook b7 and maybe even rook a to a7, and we'll get both rooks on the 7th with maybe a crunching position. So maybe this position already is actually quite dire, or even you could imagine. Well, I think that's the key point, because rook d7s is always rook c1s in reply. So I think the key point might be rook takes b6. But anyway, Hikaru, he goes a pawn down here by force. So something's up with the previous combination if black forcibly has to go a pawn down. Before we step into the rest of the game for move 36, what happened here exactly? In this position, there was this seemingly humble queen retreat, okay, targeting that d6, and knight b5 is a gaping hole. I mean, you could say that a lot of black pawn moves here have left these major, like, square opportunities for vicious knights. With this dark square bishop, you know, apart from g3, it hasn't really got that many concrete targets in the position. So maybe this is simply what happened, and also like b7 is under fire. So if black wastes time defending b7 here, then knight b5 again, and d6 is going to drop. So maybe this is just the kind of nice position with a couple of pressure points, which Magnus had hoped for, which just peeling off a pawn by force, it seems. So in this position, okay, so rook a1, we see this. Maybe a necessary tactic, a lesser evil tactic. So rook takes c1, rook takes c1. Can you see what's wrong with this decoy. There's a move white can play just to win a pawn here. If I give you 5 seconds from now. Okay, instead of capturing the rook, you just play rook takes g6 first. Check. So white now is a pawn up. Now, is this pawn a big deal? You know, without the rooks, you know, white's played an ultra positional game. It seems waiting for black to do all the exchanges, subtle like manoeuvres, creating target points. With a couple of target points, he seemed to forcibly win a pawn. So we ended up in this situation. A smooth positional ride, one might say. Okay, there's still entry points, like c6, to victimize these pawns even, or c8. So against c6 maybe, this next move, queen d6. But now, you know, c8 is still an entry point. We see h4 from Magnus, and this is the exploitable part of black's pawn chain over here, to be able to play h5 to undermine f5. With that in mind, actually, I don't know if this was a clear blunder as well. You know, maybe black could have thought of something else better than this, but bishop f7, it allows Magnus to play a clever little undermining move. Actually, if I give you 5 seconds, can you spot it here? I mean, I've given the clue anyway. Okay, it's h5. Temporary pawn sack even. Because if takes, then there's queen c8 check, taking f5, leaving h5 vulnerable, and maybe even like bishop e4s later are going to get into the black king position. So this is a really nice undermining move here, as a temporary pawn sack. So is Hikaru going to lose another pawn, or something else horrible is going to happen now? So hg6, king takes g6. His king's being brought up the board. Not nice. Queen c2. So that's pinning that pawn. g4 is now possible. So okay, Hikaru's got this outside pass pawn, but it's going to take a long time to travel down the board over here. So b5, g4. And this also has some tactical implications now, as we're about to see. Queen e5. White can just take on f5. And now if queen takes f5, there's bishop e4, skewering the queen. So Hikaru's going now 2 pawns down. But yeah, he's got the outside pass pawn. Is this getting more dangerous? Well, how is Magnus going to deal without this outside pass pawn? He plays queen e4, powerful centralization. Queen d6, and now queen h4. And now it's kind of vicious, actually, these things like queen g5 and f6. So against this, okay, bishop c4 is played, as though maybe, you know, f1 is important. You know, queen d1's to 8, queen d1, queen d6, maybe trying to get some sort of draw in potentially. Unlikely. Bishop f3 is played. The king can now comfortably go to g2 if needed. Also, the bishop stops any queen d1s. Okay, queen f6. The queen is offered. Maybe Naka's sick of all these potential threats. He wants to do something about them. So the queen's come off, and now this bishop e4, and this bishop's nicely on the target queening square, as well as supporting f5. So bishop a2. Now, will this bishop be dragging this pawn along? Well, something horrible, really horrible happens here in this ending. b4, king f2, and now a trap is kind of set. b3. Magnus is prepared to sack a pawn to give black this very, very nasty pin. Bishop d5. Look at this. So if b2, bishop takes a2, stopping the pawn from queening. If the bishop moves, then bishop takes b3. Okay, Naka takes his pawn. Now you might think, after all that positional play, all white has is an extra pawn and slightly better bishop, maybe. Well, actually, it's a big deal. It's a big deal here. King f3. These are 2 connected passed pawns. King f6, e4. Black is now spectating as white is increasing the inertia of these 2 passed pawns. And in fact, king e3, the king can glide on dark squares to avoid any potential tactical issues. So king d4, and now the pawns continue in their lust to expand. You know, black is just spectating here. King g5, king e5, now f6 is going to have an f7. So here, Naka resigned. I think this is an incredible positional game. showing that you don't have to play that aggressively even on the queen side. You can sit and wait, let black do all the work, let black create squares which are weak, which create extra vulnerabilities later, pick up a pawn, win the endgame. That seems to be the message here. But there's also another sort of message, which is like a compliment to Luke McShane, that the dark square bishop in these kinds of situations, where white is trying for a light square strategy, especially on the queen side, the dark square bishop doesn't seem to be that effective. But let's have a look at this game in overview and summary. So the Dutch Leningrad kind of tamed through this kind of almost double fianchetto of the bishop, but the bishop coming to a3 temporarily to cause some issues. But it does retreat back soon to that b2. So this e4 really drastically changed the nature of the game. Maybe if Naka was content with a draw, I don't know if d4's coming from white though. Maybe, I don't know, he was a bit nervous about d4. But this did drastically give the opportunities, and later this vulnerability, this kind of vulnerability was what cost the black the game. So these vulnerabilities are exposed with this e4, this breaking move. The bishop returns to that fianchetto position, the default fianchetto position, after doing some work on a3. d6 is now clearly a target. Okay, there's some tactical vulnerabilities though with bishop g3s. They're extinguished as well with knight e2. So Magnus has to be very, very careful tactically. But this positional sacrifice again changes the nature of the game. And I think a key thing here is black's weakening of the b5 square with this very committal c5 which comes up. When black had played c5, it means that potentially, that knight's kind of menacing coming to b5 later at the right moment. But first, some transactions, some exchange of pawn prisoners. But now look, the knight is free to come to b5 now, knight b5. With d6, so vulnerable, black is forcibly, it seems, losing a pawn now. Okay, so against this, rook b6 and rook b7, I think that's the key threat. Naka just accepts being a pawn down rather miserably. But worse than that is this undermining operation on these g6 and f5 pawns, to kind of end up being 2 pawns up now that f5 is undermined, and queen f5 wasn't possible because of bishop e4. And this endgame, okay, this endgame 2 pawns up is not so hot. So in fact Magnus is able to sack one of the pawns just to be 1 pawn up, but it's enough because black is now spectating now. These pieces are now turned into spectators for black's king to infiltrate and steer the pawn for its queening square. Hope you enjoyed it. I hope there's some instructive positional themes in there. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.